All right, I believe we are good to go. Let me move the table out of the way. Find the marker. Put on my sweater, and I'm ready. And I also have graded work. If you have any work that you haven't picked up, I've graded everything, but I've got stuff that was graded as of last week here, all alphabetized, so be sure to get that before you go. What questions? Yes?
Can aging rates evolve?
So the question is, can aging rates evolve? Well, we will begin with the question of why do we age? Because, well, that's one idea, the wear and tear hypothesis, that we wear out. So why do I wear out so slowly compared to a dog? I don't think I am so much less hard on my body than a dog is on its body. So the wear and tear hypothesis makes sense in a world of machines, but doesn't apply so well to the living world, because what do organisms do? They repair themselves. And what do you need to repair yourself? Is that free, or do you need to devote energy and resources? Yeah. So you need to devote energy and resources to keeping yourself fit and to keep yourself from aging. What else would one do with energy and resources that's relevant in, say, natural selection? Reproduce. So there's a trade-off between reproduction and longevity. So the question is, can aging rates evolve? An equivalent question is, can natural selection influence the way you allocate resources and energy to reproduction versus maintenance? So for those of you who just entered, we just posed the question to the crowd, can natural selection influence the way you allocate resources to reproduction versus maintenance and longevity? Yeah, probably. So if you are in an environment where you have really high extrinsic mortality, so you're likely to die from falling rocks or running cars, would it make sense to devote a lot of energy to maintaining yourself instead of reproducing?
Yeah.
Probably. Very good. So this room is speculative. I can still hear that bouncing on the wall. So that's suggesting natural selection under those circumstances would favor reproduction and not longevity. If, on the other hand, you live in a very placid, nice environment where you've got decades to potentially keep reproducing, would it make sense to devote all of your energy to reproducing huge broods early on at the cost of long-term reproduction? No, probably not. So natural selection can act on how you use your energy at different times of your life, and if it does that, then it will influence rates of aging. So I don't know if we use this term, but a term that's sometimes just used in this context is adaptive demography. So demographic variables are things like survivorship at different ages, or how many offspring you produce at any given age. The idea that it's adaptive means that there's a trade-off between, say, reproduction and longevity. So that things like when you reproduce and how much you reproduce are influenced by natural selection, because they also influence your survival. For those of you who've had more than 80 or in ecology course, the phrase life tables may ring bells, maybe bad ones. And that's really just a description of how you allocate energy over your life to reproduction and how your survivorship changes. So, Gloria, is that? Yes.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So we tend to think of aging as inevitable. What is the evidence that aging is not inevitable?
So the question is, what is the evidence that aging is not inevitable? I'm going to first throw that out to your wisdom.
I answer that by saying different organisms age at different rates.
That's exactly what I would say. So the fact that a dog ages at 10 times the rate that I do suggests that, well, if I live 10 times longer than a dog, it should be, at least in principle, possible for something to live 10 times as long as I do. So that in theory, you could actually devote huge amounts of effort to maintaining yourself and live a really long time. Yeah,
So it's just that simple, you just say it.
So the question is it just that simple? So if, for example, on an exam you were asked that very question, you said, well, different things age at different rates, I would expect you to flesh out the argument a little more than that. I'd say that, well, you know, some things can live much longer than other things, and we know that natural selection can influence how much energy you allocate to maintaining yourself. If you're under the right circumstances, so you live in a nice, gentle environment, natural selection will favor longer and longer lifespans. But only if by living longer, the net effect is you're going to reproduce that much more. So working all of that.
Yeah.
Answer? Okay.
I'm sorry, I have a hard time with that.
Okay. You object to it on principle?
Well, I mean, I just don't understand how it's not inevitable in that.
So Charles, go ahead.
So they, in the book, they mentioned C. elegans, and there's this one gene that if they change it slightly, it increases the lifespan by 80%.
Right.
Right? And that's pretty much, it just lasts a lot longer. And also they've actually shown that fruit flies, you can actually breed them so that they live much longer than what would actually be expected.
I agree with that. They die.
They eventually die. So by inevitable, maybe I'm overstating the
I
case.
think you're overstating.
Perhaps I'm overstating. It's probably going to be the case that if you reproduce at all, you're going to affect your longevity, ultimately. So taken to extremes, which is a great way to argue, particularly in physics, yeah, it's probably not the case that you can completely avoid aging, but in a practical sense, aging rates and longevity reflect balances of natural selection, and if we can live to be 100, there's no reason we couldn't live to be 200. Some animals do. I know a guy, I think I might have mentioned this, who works on Greenland sharks. Did I mention this? These are slow-moving, deep, cold-water sharks, and he can find indications in isotopic concentrations of them being alive 300 or 400 years.
So in that excerpt, you want us to talk about the trade-offs between maintenance and reproduction, and how that relates to the different spectrum of aging.
That would be a strong answer to describe those trade-offs. And you know, it's always hard when you have an exam, somebody gives you a question and you remember this phrase as the explanation. It's always nice for me to know that you do more than remember the phrase, or things like this trade-off between longevity and reproduction. That would give you some credit. It'd be nice if I saw evidence of your reasoning too, within the time constraints of the exam and all that stuff. So, aging is probably not inevitable in theory, but the rates at which we age, you know, they're adjustable enough that there's no reason we need to age at the rates that we do. So, yes.
I just want to, I was also talking about low extrinsic mortality rates favoring longevity. So maybe the example of the possums on the island versus the mainland also potentially answering that question.
That would be a beautiful explanation of it. And so different organisms age at different rates. So that's a within species example where you can adjust the extrinsic mortality rates and see a difference. Charlie mentioned the fruit fly example in the book. That's another example. Or looking at across species, organisms that have low extrinsic mortality rates tend to have longer lifespans, not just because they don't get eaten or hit by cars, but because they age more slowly. It makes sense from a selection standpoint to devote more energy to maintenance if you're going to have multiple opportunities to reproduce.
So we've talked about agnostic phytotyping has some genes that promote fairly survival and then maybe they become deleterious later or increase rate of aging. And there's a question here that says, can you explain conditions under which a late-acting deleterious oil can be favored even if it has only a relatively small benefit at another age? So,
An Going to be Anna, do you have a suggestion? Or did you?
So, if it's at all beneficial for cats, before or after reproduction, and it increases fitness at all, then it's going to, even if it's just a little bit, it's going to be favored, even if it's super damaging after reproduction, because there's no selection for it against it whatsoever as far as reproduction goes.
So, for example, if I do percent surviving, so I'll do a survivorship curve for age, and for a lot of species it looks like this. So a little bit of benefit's going to affect just about everybody. Let's say this is where reproduction happens. And then if it's got a big negative effect here, there's so few individuals that even see that. And the ones that do a post-reproduction, then this little benefit's going to
Yeah, I totally understand that. I wasn't sure if just like the little benefit meant us to think about it like having no benefit, but you really meant
I meant small,
you really
relative to the cost later.
got it.
Yeah. And so that's both selection shadow, mutation accumulation idea, but in particular antagonistic plasmid because they have opposite effects. So you could remove this and still probably not have the gene disappear. But if you add just a little bit, then maybe if you have a negative effect even here during reproductive age, there are few enough left there, the benefits here might outweigh the costs. So, there's going to be some point to show that.
I was wondering if hitchhiking could also be a thing with that. I know it's not really talking about selecting against it or anything, but if it's hitchhiking as a gene that is being selected for,
If what's being selected for?
if it's hitchhiking a gene that is selected.
Yes, you could have a favorable gene and deleterious genes being hitchhiked to high frequency.
Yeah.
So that's an additional complication, a different idea, but it could relate to this.
Okay.
So you could have one gene that has a positive effect here and linked to it as the bad gene that has a negative effect here. But it could even be the same gene. I think just for conceptual clarity, it's easier to think about a single gene that has multiple effects, but the same idea could apply.
Along with the question that Prismal had, I feel like this might run into it. Why organisms that are armored or otherwise protected from predators tend to age more slowly than smaller sized and closely related organisms? Is that an extrinsic mortality factor?
Mm-hmm. So they'd be less subject to extrinsic mortality because they're well protected. This is fun, by the way. I love it. Yeah.
How is myopia mismatched similarity?
So we were a little quick. Oh, hands are coming. Even better than questions. Are people eager to jump in? So how is it?
Well, we know that myopia is partially heritable, so we can assume that these are genes that are present in the parents if the children have myopia. And like back in the day, the caveman times, they weren't in the environment that we are in now, and they didn't have these problems with myopia, otherwise they would die and be selected for, because they wouldn't see the little line hanging out. Maybe not the tiny, the smaller grass. But yeah, and so, but now we've got a different environment, and there's different things happening with the way that we're raised, or like chemicals or something, and that neutral gene is now becoming deleterious because it's either being expressed or not expressed. Causing these problems.
So a general point is the fitness of an allele depends on the context, and we may have all kinds of alleles that were neutral or maybe even positive under